Stop Now, a social experiment enterprise.
Welcome to Stop Now. I'm Nate.
Hello there, I'm Melissa, and we're back for this week's talk show.
Yes, we're going to continue the stories from last week's discussion.
Let us continue with the questions.
Yes, moving on to another story. In one of our last discussions, we looked at how the immigration plan not only affected the foreigners, but also had an effect on the locals as well.
Did we not discuss this story in our previous episode? Hold on.
I'm not sure. Maybe we can check it out with our team.
I remember mentioning this story.
Oh, I see. Well, then we can continue on with other stories. We're going to look at another victim of the H-1B visa.
I don't actually agree that it's victims of H-1B visas. I think they're victims of abusive employers. And I think they're on H-1B visas, which makes it extra hard for them. But I don't think it's the visa that's causing this. Victims of H-1B visas.
That was going to be one of my later questions. Like, is it the system inherently, or is it people taking advantage of the system? Like, what's the root problem here?
Neither. In my opinion, okay, I think there are abusive employers in general, right? Citizens have labor disputes all the time.
Right.
I think it makes it more difficult for H-1B holders when they face an employer dispute, because not only are they out of money, they're usually out of visa too. So I think that my personal view on this is not so much that these are visa related abuses. They're connected with the visa because I think the impact is stronger when they are on a temporary visa and an employer is behaving in a certain way. And there's also a slightly power play here, because at any time there's abuse, whether it's domestic abuse or employer abuse, you see that the person who is doing the abusing has the perception that they're a little bit more in power.
Correct.
And we see that with this year with the Me Too movement, we've seen that power abuse across the board in so many industries. And so I don't think it's specific to H-1B visas.
I think that's an important clarification, and we appreciate that. So let's talk about Brandon, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on Brandon's story. So Brandon is a middle-aged programmer who has struggled to afford care for his daughter. He was born with L4 spina bifida and hydrocephalus, but Brandon was fired from his last job and he was replaced by an H-1B guest worker. Brandon had to train this worker. Brandon struggled to find medical insurance for his daughter. He was busy training the replacement, and the truth is, Brandon feels like it's cheap labor for corporations to line the pockets of the business owners and
it shouldn't have been.
Politicians.
The whole idea is, again, the prevailing wage requirement is there in place so that it's not cheap labor.
Yes,
right?
And for somebody in this position, like what would you say to Brandon, who has those these thoughts about his particular situation?
Something that was, again, the employer did not follow rules is probably what happened, because this is the violations, right? An employer, according to the H-1B rules, the employer is not allowed to make the employee pay for their application. Okay. So when an employer says to an employee, I want you to pay me money so I can apply for your visa, that itself is a violation. The rules are actually set to protect U.S. workers. The rules are set such that the employer is supposed to pay them prevailing wage and pay for their application. So it inevitably becomes more expensive for an employer to hire somebody on a visa than to hire a citizen. And a lot of times we actually get employers who tell us, look, I can't afford to hire somebody on an H-1B visa because not only do they have the freedom to leave, even after I've spent all this money sponsoring and training them, they still can leave and go to another employer, And so, this is where, as an immigration practitioner, I see abuses, of course, but I also see employers who, the other side of the coin, where the employers are like, I can't find a U.S. citizen worker, and I can't afford to pay all of these extra fees to find an H-1B worker. So I'm a small-time employer. What do I do? So I see kind of that segment from both sides.
Well, and Melissa, you can bring in some of the other questions that we had on our list here in a second. But I did want to kind of dovetail off of that, Dinu, in the sense that I feel like everything has been affected by the biggest story of the year, which is COVID-19. In your field, like how has COVID-19 specifically affected what's been going on with these immigration visas?
Well, people are losing jobs, and for a person on visa, losing the job means losing their visa. Okay. And so of course it's gotten, very serious. It's gotten people to take on additional schooling. I mean, some of my clients are like, I lost my job, I'm out of visa. Now there's like this executive order banning H-1B visa from entering. So even if I go back, I can't come back until this executive order is lifted. And so now, like, what do I do? And oftentimes if they're like a master's degree holder and they end up having to get a second master's so they can ride this COVID-19 out. So we see people taking on additional education. That's a common solution for people. Hey, I'm, this master's degree I've always wanted to get. Now's the time because I'm out of work,
Right.
So we see that happening. We see a lot of people leaving. Actually, I'm seeing a lot of people going to Canada.
Interesting.
I mean, I wouldn't want to have that happen unless there's a replacement. And I think that as a country, you're looking at, H-1B visas should be eliminated, okay? And they should be eliminated, but there should be a way we can train U.S. citizen workers to fill those jobs. The problem is that it's the same problem with medical schools, right? We're getting foreign medical students, but how hard is it to get into medical school, right? So you have U.S. students who can't even get into medical schools, and then they have shortages of doctors.
Yeah.
So it's a pipeline problem.
Right.
So the problem is we're not doing a good enough job training our student force to fill those jobs. And then we have a shortage.
Yeah.
So you can't eliminate the top and you can't eliminate the solution without solving it from the ground up.
Right. And so you mentioned there were some changes. Do any of the changes kind of address some of those issues that you brought up?
The changes make it harder for people to get H-1B visas. And that is going to be, if these changes are implemented, it means that the prevailing wage, which is already at a certain level, is going to be increased by about 43%.
Oh,
wow, that's a lot.
Okay. So in my opinion, in my views, there are so many issues that are created, and I agree that there are issues. There's no question about it. But the issues are created because we have a fundamental education to workforce connection issue. Our workforce demands a certain type of marketplace. Our education is not designed for it. And the second thing is that when we eliminate, the H-1B worker force, before we address the root pipeline issue, before we address it, then what we're doing is we're losing on the global competition to countries like Canada, Australia, who are welcoming these people.
Okay. All right. So how does an H-1B visa holder file a complaint?
They file it with the Department of Labor, just like any employee would file.
For the H-1B visa holder than if it were, the average Joe or the average Jill trying to apply?
It's not more difficulties, and this is where I come in. Like, I educate people on it. There's a problem because people are not educated in this process. And they're afraid. I mean, legitimately, they're afraid because the system makes it very easy to fire an H-1B worker. Hey, you can't pay him the prevailing wage. Well, you're not allowed to just keep him on the books. Then get rid of him. And the employee, a lot of times, there's like, well, then what does this mean? Because now I have a spouse and kids, and my kids are going to school. And what does this mean for me? They're always living on the edge. Like, I could be fired at any time. I would be losing. My whole family would be suffering because of it.
That's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, stress on top of stress, in an already stressful time.
You've acclimated to the new environment, And now, like, all of a sudden you have to go back. So now what are you doing with your kids? You know, they're going through fifth grade here, and now they have to go back to a whole different system, you know? And so as a worker, sometimes what you end up doing is, for the sake of your family, you sacrifice. You say, yeah, you know, this employment really sucks, but I have the burden of other people on me, and I don't have the luxury of just saying, okay, I'm not going to work for you. The way the H-1B is conceptualized, it's not really for the non-immigrant. It's conceptualized in a way to meet an employment need for a company. So it is a company's visa. The company owns the H-1B visa, not the individual. And the company is essentially, when they apply for a green card, what they're saying, H-1B has a maximum term of 6 years. You can't stay on an H-1B for more than 6 years unless the company makes a proving that they need you here permanently. And in order to prove, that's how it's tied. And in order to prove that they need you here permanently, they actually have to do advertising campaign first to try and replace you with a U.S. citizen worker.
We definitely appreciate the question from the listeners out there. Again, any questions, call the number, let us know, because we definitely want to get more clarification. And like you said, education, I think, is a very key component to all of this. I didn't want to get too political, but we are in an election season, and I wonder, like, how much varying administrations, like, what effect does that have on the work that you do?
I'm always listening and paying attention to the news. It's what I find is that there's just a lot of flux with different policies and everything around the election time. And I think we can expect that there will be some additional news related items. I mean, H-1B, I think, in my opinion, H-1B ends up becoming very politicized, and by both parties. And I don't, hear, like, both parties, as soon as they get into power, I mean, something or the other changes with regards to immigration. And so we're always paying attention. And what I find is very important is to dissect the, like, sound bites that you hear on the news and really boil it down to what is actually true, what is exaggeration, and what is going to be easy to implement, not easy to implement. So you're going to find in this season, there's going to be so much confusion. And you actually need to have somebody who's on the ground, who's working with these applications to explain whether or not something impacts an individual and how much it impacts and how it impacts. The problem is that you hear, for the goal of journalism is different. The goal of journalism is to find viewers, to create the shock effect, there's a lot of different goals, but that creates additional problems for practitioners because people will hear something and panic. It may or may not actually apply to them. It may or may not be exaggerated.
It's like that old saying, the lie is halfway around the world before the truth is even out of bed, and the way that misinformation can get spread. So I'm glad that we had you here to clarify that. I believe, Melissa, we are getting close to time this week, though. But so before we left, I did want to allow Dina to, give a final word or any other closing thought here, because she has given us so much information that I think is good for the people out there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Can I just say something? You mentioned some really interesting employment abuses and employment violations. And for people out there who have been mistreated by their employer, who have lost pay, who've had employers who threatened them with loss of visa, or who've made them pay for their visa fees, or all of that, complaining to the DOL has another benefit with regards to immigration, and that is that you can apply for a T visa. A T visa is specifically for resolving these kinds of abuses. So you're taking the power away from the employer in that case by having a T visa, which allows you to work independently for any employer. And, it requires you to report the violations and then work independently for any employer. If you are afraid of losing your visa because your employer keeps threatening it, whether or not you're in an H-1B, or you could be on any visa, or you could even be undocumented, you could qualify for the T visa. And that is very, very important for you to know.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that information. Again, we want to, Melissa and I, as well as the folks out there, the listeners, and the viewers, want to extend a gracious thank you to Ms. Dina
Yes,
Morrow,
thank you so
immigration
much.
attorney. Like, thank you so much for stopping by and giving us some education and some much needed information on this topic.
Definitely.
And we'd love to talk to you again down the road.
I think maybe bringing out the TVs, like now you guys know that this alternative is out there. And like the first scenario, Melissa, that you read, I was like listening to it, I was like, oh my God, I want to get this guy a TV. So like right now, he deserves it. Or she,
Aw.
whatever. Like I want this person to have it because it's the classic case,
Mhm.
the company is threatening, there's lack of pay, there's
Right.
all these like, even if they're not true, but like the perception of it is like, if I go against this company, they're going to damage me in some very permanent way,
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye for now. Stay safe. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks,
No
guys.
problem. Everybody have a good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Stop Now, a social experiment enterprise.